Today we are learning to multiply decimals. So you guys are absolute stars at multiplying whole numbers. We're just going to have a wee look at decimals and how multiplying them is similar to multiplying whole numbers and also a little bit different. So we're going to start with 6 times 0.25, which, if you're thinking about it, is also the same as 6 times a quarter, or 6 lots of a quarter, or 6 sets of a quarter. So we're just looking for, what we're really looking for is 6 quarters and how that's going to work. So what we could do is you could just add up 6 quarters if you really wanted. What I could do is I could split these shapes into quarters each. Not very even quarters, but quarters, okay. And then if I wanted to talk about 6 quarters, I'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay. And if you were thinking about these shapes here, you'd have one whole here, and you'd have a half or 0.5 over on this side, okay. So as a pictorial representation of what we're doing today, 6 times a quarter would be a quarter plus 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 a quarter, or 6 quarters. And if we drew this picture, we'd find out that it's actually 1.5. Now we're going to check that with our window method again. So what we've got here is we're going to put our times up here. We've got 6 down here. Okay, now we're multiplying by 0.25. So if we remember, we're going to go multiplying by 0.2 is going to go here, and this is 0.05 over here, all right? 0.05. And that's because if we're speaking about place value here, we have 5 hundredths, so we have 5 hundredths here, and 2 tenths, and so we have 2 tenths here. Now, multiplying decimals works very, very similarly to multiplying whole numbers, but when you multiply decimals, the same, however many decimal places there are in the question, there needs to be that many in the answer. So however many decimal places there are in the, I'm going to run out of space here, in the question, you need that many in the answer, okay? It might not make very much sense right now, but it will make sense as we move on. So here we have 6 times 0.2. I don't have any decimal places here, but I have 1 decimal place here. So I need 1 decimal place in my answer. So 6 times 2 is 12, but I need a decimal place, so it's going to be 1.2. So if you're thinking about it that way, so it's 6 times 2 tenths, and you're going to end up with 1 whole and 2 tenths here. So I'm going to have 1 whole and 2 tenths, okay? And then here I should have 2 decimal places in my answer. So 6 times 5 hundredths, 6 times 5 is 30, so I'm going to have 6 times 5 hundredths is 30 hundredths, but 30 hundredths is the same thing as 3 tenths. So we're going to have, again, I have 2 decimal places in my question, so I need 2 decimal places in my answer. So I have 0.30. Now, you guys know that we don't actually need this 0, but we needed it for the purposes of doing the question. Okay, and then just like we did with the other numbers, we're just going to add these together. So 1.2 plus 0.3 is equal to 1.5. All right, and again, we're just going to have this answer as 1.5, which is the same thing we came up with when we just drew a picture, okay? So it's the same setup as if you're doing whole numbers by whole numbers, but however many decimal places you have in your question, you need that many decimal places in your answer, all right? Okay. Now we're going to try something a bit different, something I can't draw a picture for. So we're going to try 7 times 0.32. I don't know how to split up a circle into 32 hundredths, so we're going to leave the picture for now, and we're just going to do it in the section here. Now, what I have now is I'm going to have 7 times 0.32, so down here I'll have 7, and up at the top I have 0.3, or 3/10, and then I have 2 hundredths here, so 0.02, and that's just going to go up here. All right, so again, I'm going to multiply 7 times 3/10. 7 times 3/10 is going to be 21/10. Okay, so I'm going to have the number 21, but 21/10 is actually 2 wholes and 1/10, because I know that I have to have as many decimal places as there are in the question. I need that many in my answer. So I know that there's 1 decimal place here, the tenths, so in my answer I need to have the same. And if you think about it, 21/10, okay, you have 10 tenths makes 1, 10 other tenths makes 2, so 20 tenths makes 2, and then 1/10 left over is in your tenths column here, okay? And then again, we're going to do 7 times 2 hundredths. So 7 times 2 hundredths is going to be 14 hundredths. All right, but remember I said that 14 hundredths has to have 2 decimal places because there's 2 decimal places in my question. So 14 hundredths is going to look like this, 0.14. Okay, and that makes sense because 2 hundredths plus 2 hundredths is 4 hundredths plus another 2, you know, we go up, and 14 hundredths is going to look like this, all right? And then all we have to do is add them together, and that's going to be a nice simple 2.24. So we've got 7 times 0.32 is 2.24. Perfect. Okay, before what we were doing, everything was getting bigger. Not very much bigger, but everything was getting bigger. So our 7 times 0.32 was equal to 2.24. So we had 7 lots of 0.32, and that, you know, they got bigger with time as you added more together, and we ended up with 2 wholes and 24 hundredths. Now, that's because we multiplied a whole number by a decimal number. Now, we're going to have a think just like as a picture of a half times a half, all right? So if we think about a half times a half, so 0.5 times 0.5, what we're looking for is half of a lot of a half, right? The same way that we were talking about 7 lots of 0.32, now we're looking for half of a lot of a half. So if we get our shapes back out, okay, so if we have our shape here, and I split my shape into a half with a line down the middle, okay, so I'm speaking about this half over on this side. This is the half that I'm concerned about. Now, I'm speaking about this half, but really I only want half of that half because 0.5 times 0.5 is half of a half. So what I need to do to this half is I then need to split it in half. And then all of a sudden, all I'm speaking about is this bit. Okay, now if you'll notice, the bit that is now colored in is smaller than the one we started with. Okay, we started with a half, and now all of a sudden, I've got a quarter, and a quarter is written as 0.25, so I'll just pop that in here. Okay, now, when we multiply a decimal by a decimal, we're going to get a smaller number because if you think about it, we've got part of something or part of a whole times another part of a whole. You're going to end up with an even smaller bit of that part. Whereas when we multiply a whole number by a decimal, you're just getting lots of small bits and putting them all together. But here, when we multiply a decimal by a decimal, you're actually going to get a smaller part than what you started with, which seems a bit counterintuitive because usually when we multiply, we get bigger, but when we multiply a decimal number by a decimal number, just decimals, no wholes, we get actually smaller. All right, so we're going to keep that in mind when we move towards the next question. All right, we're going to try 3.5 times 2.7. So again, we've got a 2-digit number here and a 2-digit number here, so we're going to need our full window frame. But it's going to work a little bit differently because we've got these decimals now. So I've got 3, which is going to go up the top here, and 0.5, which we'll put up here. And then we've got 2 over here, and 0.7 is going to go over here. So I'll start with the simple one. So we've got 2 times 3, that's nice and simple, that's just 6. So that's going to go in here. 2 times a half, well, 2 times 5/10 is 10/10, and 10/10 is 1. But remember, for every decimal place that you have in your question, which is 1, you should have in your answer, which is 1.0. Now, I don't need to keep the 0.0 once I've sorted out my question, so I'm just going to delete that. So it's just a 1, okay? Then 3 times 0.7, 3 times 0.7 is going to be, or 3 times 7/10 is going to be 21/10. So if I wrote 21, I've got 21/10, but 21/10 is actually 2.1. And as we know, I have 1 decimal place in my question here, so I should have 1 decimal place in my answer, which I do. All right, now see, all of these got bigger because they all involved a whole number or 2 whole numbers. So we had 3, which is a whole number, times a decimal, which got bigger, 2, which is a whole number, times a decimal, which got bigger. But now we've got our decimal times a decimal, and as we said, half of 0.7 is actually going to be smaller than what we started with. So we've got 0.5 times 0.7. So if we're thinking about, let's just get a Numicon rod out here. So if we've got, let's say that this is a whole, okay, and we've split up our whole into 10. If we're thinking about our 7/10, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, this is what we're already speaking about, and we're going to multiply that by a half. So we're actually going to split this into a half. So what we've got already, we're splitting into a half, and then all of a sudden I have an even smaller number, okay? So 7 times 5, as you know, is 35. So 35, we're going to have a 3 and a 5 in our answer. Keypad. Okay, but as I was saying before, it's going to be smaller than what we started with, and for however many decimals there are in the question, decimal places there are in the question, there needs to be that many decimal places in the answer, and we have 1 decimal place here and 1 decimal place here. So I need 2 decimal places, so it's going to be 0.35. So we're going to end up half of 7/10 is actually 35 hundredths, or 3/10 and 5 hundredths, which is what we have here. And we can add those all together. So we're going to have 6 plus 1 plus 2.1 plus 0.35 is equal to 789, 9.45. Okay, so 3.5 times 2.7 is equal to 9.45. And as I said, we've got this backwards world where when you multiply a decimal by another decimal with no whole numbers, you end up with a smaller decimal than both of the ones that you started with, which seems back to front, but actually does make sense when you think about it. Right, well, we do one more. All right, the last one we're going to do is 4.2 times 8.9. So we've got 4, 0.2, an 8, and a 0.9. We'll start with the nice and easy ones. 4 times 8, a nice easy 32. Okay, and then we've got 8 times 0.2, or 8 times 2 tenths. You're going to have 16 tenths, but 16 tenths is 1 whole and 6 tenths. And as you know, we have 1 decimal place in our question, so 1 decimal place in our answer. And again with here, 4 times 0.9, 4 times 9 tenths is 36 tenths. 4 times 9 is 36, but again, we have 1 decimal place in our question, so we need 1 decimal place in our answer. 36 tenths is 3.6. All right, the fun bit. A decimal by a decimal with no wholes. So we know that 0.2 of 0.9 is actually going to end up being smaller because it's a part of a part. So if we think about 2 times 9 is 18, but like we were saying, we need 2 decimal places in our answer, so it would be 0.18 because we need both of those numbers to be in the decimal places. All right, and then all we have to do is add it all together. So 32 plus 3.6 plus 1.6 plus 0.18. So 35, 36, 37.2, 37.38. So 37.38 all together. All right, the takeaway from today, this is the most important bit. However many decimal places there are in the question, you need that many in the answer. And the same goes, it's true for the whole thing. So we've got 4.2 times 8.9. And again, we have 2 here, that's 1 decimal place, and a 9 here, that's 2 decimal places. And look at that, I've got 2 decimal places in my answer. All right, I'll attach some questions. Best of luck.